On the morning of my 64th birthday, my daughter-in-law slid a manila envelope across the kitchen table and told me it was time to think about my future. I remember staring at that envelope for a long moment. The coffee in my mug was still steaming. Outside, a February wind was pushing snow against the window. That particular kind of Alberta wind that sounds like it has a grudge against you personally. I thought she was going to hand me a birthday card. It was not a birthday card. Inside was a printed brochure for a retirement community in Leduc. She had circled a studio suite on the second page with a red pen. Beside it, in her handwriting, only 2,800 mon. Very reasonable. My son was sitting right there. He was looking at his phone. I didn't say anything. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and said I'd think about it. She smiled like she'd done me a favor. My son looked up briefly, nodded, and went back to his screen. That was March. By November, I had found out they were planning to sell my house while I was still living in it. I need to back up, because none of this will make sense without the full picture. And I have thought a long time about how to tell this story, whether to tell it at all. But I am 66 now, and I have learned that silence has a cost. I stayed silent for too long. So here it is. My name is Douglas. I spent 31 years working for the city of Edmonton, most of it in infrastructure planning. I am not a wealthy man, but I am a careful one. My wife, Carol, passed in 2018 from ovarian cancer. We had been married 38 years. When she died, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I was wrong. Carol and I had one son. His name is Nathan. He was 31 when his mother passed, newly married to a woman named Renee, and living in a rented condo in St. Albert. They were a young couple still finding their feet. Renee worked in marketing. Nathan was in logistics. Decent job, not spectacular, but solid. They were fine. The house Carol and I had shared was a 4-bedroom in the west end of Edmonton, Terwilligar area, if you know it. We bought it in 1997 for $208,000, which felt like an enormous sum at the time. I remember signing the papers with shaking hands. Carol laughed at me. "Douglas," she said, "you're allowed to be happy." The house was fully paid off by 2015. After Carol died, it was mine, free and clear, assessed at just under $650,000. My retirement savings were modest. I had my pension from the city, around $4,200 a month, and a small RRSP I had been careful with. But the house was my real security, my foundation. I never thought much about this because it had never been in question. In the spring of 2021, Nathan and Renee were having a hard stretch. Nathan's company had restructured during the pandemic, and his hours had been cut significantly. Their lease was coming up. The condo they were in had been sold by the landlord, and they had 60 days to find something else. The rental market in St. Albert at that point was, I think most Albertans remember this, absolutely brutal. They were looking at $1,300 a month for a 2-bedroom, more than they could comfortably manage with Nathan's reduced income. I offered to let them move in with me. I want to be precise about how I said this, because I have replayed it many times. I called Nathan on a Sunday evening. I said, "There is plenty of room here. You are welcome to stay while you get back on your feet." Those were my exact words, "while you get back on your feet." I thought that was clear. I thought a grown man of 33 would understand that "while you get back on your feet" meant temporarily. I thought wrong. They moved in that June with 2 carloads of furniture and a dog named Biscuit. I will admit, the first few months were not bad. It was nice to have the house feel alive again. Biscuit would sit on the couch and put his head on my knee in the evenings. Nathan and I would watch hockey together on Fridays. I cooked on Sundays, the way Carol used to, and we would eat together. For a while, it felt like family was supposed to feel. The shift was gradual. I cannot point to one day and say, that was when things changed. It was more like watching a tide come in. You don't notice each individual wave, and then suddenly you are standing in water up to your chest. Renee began suggesting, politely at first, that certain things about the house needed updating. The kitchen was outdated, she said. The bathroom on the main floor was not functional. The backyard needed to be reimagined. She had opinions about every corner of a house she had been living in for 7 months. I let it go. People have opinions. Then Nathan's hours came back. His company rehired several people by August 2021, and he was back to full-time by October. I assumed they would start looking for their own place. I dropped a gentle comment one evening. Something like, "Now that things are steadier, you two must be thinking about your next step." Nathan said they were looking at options. Renee said nothing, but I noticed she did not look up from her phone. They did not move out. By early 2022, there were small things I can only describe as crowding. My workroom on the main floor. I had converted the fourth bedroom into a space where I kept Carol's things and worked on my model trains. A hobby I had taken up after she died. Was suggested as a guest room. I said no. The conversation ended, but something in how Renee looked at me afterwards stayed with me. It was not anger. Exactly. It was calculation. I am not a man who is good at confrontation. This is a flaw I am aware of. Carol used to say I could walk through a hurricane and come out the other side, still debating whether to put up an umbrella. She was not wrong. So when things felt uncomfortable, I told myself I was imagining it. When Renee made comments about the house needing new energy, I told myself she was just being young. When Nathan started saying things like, "This place has so much potential," I told myself he was being enthusiastic. I should have asked the question that seemed obvious in hindsight. Potential for what? I found out in October 2022. I was not supposed to find out the way I did. I had a routine on Tuesday mornings. I would drive to the superstore on Rabbit Hill, do my grocery shopping, and stop at Tim Hortons on the way back. I was usually gone about an hour and a half. On this particular Tuesday, I had forgotten my wallet. I came home 20 minutes after I had left, which was not part of the routine. There was a car in the driveway I did not recognize. A man in a suit jacket was coming out of the house with Renee. They were talking the way people talk when they are wrapping up a business meeting. Confident, smiling, leaning toward each other slightly like co-conspirators. The man had a notepad. Renee was saying something about the kitchen ceiling height. I parked on the street. I watched for a moment. Then I got out. Renee saw me and went very still, just for a second, just a flicker, before smiling and saying, "Doug, you're back early." Not Dad, not Douglas, just Doug. Like I was a mild inconvenience. The man in the jacket put out his hand and introduced himself. He was a real estate agent. He had been doing a walkthrough. He handed me his card. It said comparative market analysis at the top. Below that was a price estimate. The number on that page for my house was $680,000. I stood in my own driveway, in the cold, holding a piece of paper telling me what my house was worth on the open market, given to me by a real estate agent my daughter-in-law had invited in without my knowledge, while I was supposed to be at the superstore buying milk. Renee said, "We've just been exploring options." She said it the way someone says it when they have already made decisions and are only now pretending to explore. I said, very quietly, "I see." I went inside. I put the kettle on. I did not say anything else that day. That evening, Nathan came home from work, and I watched his face when he walked through the door and saw me sitting at the kitchen table. He knew I had come home early. He knew what I must have seen. He sat down across from me, and I gave him the opportunity I am sure he has thought about many times since. I looked at him and I waited. He said, "Dad, this place is too big for one person." That was what he led with. Not an explanation, not even an apology, an assessment. I asked him what his plan was, exactly. He explained. And Renee, who had come in behind him, filled in the parts he left vague, that they had been thinking for some time about selling the house, buying something smaller in the area, and using the equity to set themselves up properly. They talked about the housing market in Edmonton, about their friends who had bought property, about Renee's sister who had just purchased a townhouse in Sherwood Park. They had apparently been discussing this for months, possibly longer. I noticed, as they talked, that at no point did either of them say anything about checking whether the house was actually theirs to sell. I want to sit with that for a moment, because it is the part that still astonishes me. Two adults. A man with a university degree. A woman who worked in a professional industry. They had been planning to list, negotiate, and close a real estate transaction on a property in Alberta, where the title process is very clear very public and very searchable through the land titles office, that had never been transferred into their names in any way. They had never asked. It had never come up. I think, somehow they had decided in their own minds that Dad's house had become our house, the way an idea becomes a habit. Slowly, without examination, until one day it simply feels true. I did not correct them that evening. I thought about speaking. I had the words. I knew exactly what I could have said. I own this house. My name is on the title. You have no legal standing to sell it, list it, or so much as put a lockbox on the front door. I could have said all of that. Instead, I said I was tired and I went to bed. I lay there that night listening to them, talking quietly in the living room below me. And I made a decision. I was not going to fight them in the kitchen. I was not going to have a shouting match that would end with everyone feeling awful and nothing resolved. I was going to wait. I do not know exactly what I was waiting for. But I had turned 63 years old and buried my wife and spent 4 years living carefully and quietly in this house that Carol and I had built together, and I was not going to lose it in a kitchen argument at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. So, I waited. November passed. December arrived. The real estate agent apparently came by at least once more while I was out. I found a second business card on the counter one morning, which no one mentioned. Renee began making comments about the walls needing to be repainted before listing. She said neutral tones more than once. She had a Pinterest board, I gathered. For my house, Nathan, to his credit, seemed uneasy. There were moments when I caught him watching me with something close to guilt in his face. And I think he knew, somewhere in the part of himself that remembered being raised by two people who were honest and straightforward, that what was happening was not right. But he did not say anything to stop it. And I did not press him. We moved around each other in the kitchen in the mornings like two people who have agreed, wordlessly, to postpone something neither one of them is ready for. The week before Christmas, I drove downtown to the offices of the lawyer who had handled Carol's estate. Her name is Patricia, and she has known me for many years. I sat across from her desk and I explained the situation quietly and completely. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Douglas, they can't sell this house." I said I knew. She said, "Do they know?" I said I did not believe so. She pulled up the land title record on her computer. It took approximately 45 seconds and confirmed what I had known for 30 years. The house at my address in Edmonton, Alberta, was registered in my name alone. Carol's name had been removed from title after her passing through the proper probate process in 2018. There was no other name on that title. Not Nathan's, not Renee's, not anyone's. Patricia asked me what I wanted to do. I said I was not sure yet, but I wanted to have everything in order. I wanted the paperwork to be prepared. She printed the title search, and I folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. I thanked her. I drove home. I made dinner. Nobody said anything unusual that evening. That was December 17th. On December 23rd, I came downstairs in the morning to find that they had packed a bag for me. It was my old travel duffel, the green canvas one I had used for 20 years. It was sitting by the front door. It had been zipped up and placed there by someone else's hands. Inside, I later found were 3 days' worth of clothes, my toiletries, my blood pressure medication, and my phone charger. There was a note on the kitchen table. I do not need to describe every word of it. The essential message was this. They had decided the transition would go more smoothly if I stayed somewhere else over the holidays. They suggested my friend Walter's place or a hotel if I preferred. They said it would give them a chance to prepare the house. They said it was the best arrangement for everyone. My son had signed the note, his handwriting. Renee had written most of it. I could tell by the phrasing, but Nathan had signed it. I stood in my kitchen for a very long time. Biscuit came and sat beside me, the way dogs do when they sense something is wrong. I reached down and scratched behind his ears. He leaned against my leg. I thought about Carol. I thought about the day we moved into this house. A Saturday in September. Nathan was 9 years old. and he had been so excited about having his own room that he had tried to carry his dresser himself and gotten it stuck in the stairwell. Carol had laughed until she cried. I had pulled the dresser free, and we had all eaten pizza on the floor of the empty living room because we hadn't unpacked the table yet. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, where it had been since the 17th. I unfolded the land title document on the kitchen table. I smoothed the crease. I placed it beside the note. Then I sat down in my chair, which I had owned for 15 years, and I waited for them to come downstairs. Renee came down first around 8:30. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs when she saw me sitting there. Her eyes went to the duffel bag, which had not moved. Then to me. She said with a careful smile, "Doug, good morning. Did you see our note?" I said I had. She began explaining the timeline, the realtor, something about a photographer coming on the 27th to take listing photos. She spoke efficiently, the way she spoke in professional settings, organized and forward-moving, like a meeting that had already been decided and just needed to be communicated. I let her finish. Then I pointed to the document on the table. She looked at it. She picked it up. She read it. Or tried to. I watched her face move through several things very quickly. Confusion, rereading, something that looked like the early stages of understanding arriving somewhere she had not expected to go. She said, "What is this?" I said, "That is the land title for this property, printed from the Alberta Land Titles office 9 days ago. My name is on it. Only my name." Nathan had come downstairs by then. He was in the doorway in his socks and a sweatshirt, holding his coffee. He looked at Renee. He looked at the paper. He looked at me. I did not raise my voice. I had no need to. I said, as calmly as I could manage, "I own this house. I have owned this house since 1997. When your mother died, it passed to me alone through the estate process. Neither of your names are anywhere on this title, which you could have confirmed at any time by visiting the Alberta Land Titles office, or by simply asking me." No one said anything for a moment. Renee set the document back down on the table. She looked at Nathan. Nathan said, "Dad," said, "I am not angry." And that was the strange thing. I was not, really. I was tired. I was sad. But I had passed through the anger somewhere around December 17th, sitting across from Patricia and understanding fully what had been happening in my own home. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, what I felt was mostly grief. Not for the house, not for the money, but for the son who had stood in my kitchen and signed his name to a note telling me to leave. I told them both, clearly and without drama, what the situation was. The house was mine. No sale could proceed without my consent, my signature, and my participation in every stage of the legal process. The photographer on the 27th would be finding an empty inbox. Whatever conversations they had been having with the realtor would need to be revisited with the understanding that they had no standing to have had them. Then I said this, and I want to get it exactly right because I thought about it for a long time before I said it. You are welcome to continue living here on the same terms as when you moved in. But I think we all need to be honest about what those terms are. This is my home. You are my guests. And the arrangement was always meant to be temporary. Rennie left the room. I heard her on the phone a few minutes later, though I did not try to listen. Nathan sat down across from me. We sat in silence for a long time. He looked like a man who was doing a kind of internal accounting, going back over things, recalculating, arriving at conclusions he had been avoiding. He said, "I didn't think about the title." I said, "I know." He said, I don't know how it got so far." I said, "I do. I should have been clearer with you a long time ago about what this arrangement was. That is on me, too. But Nathan, you signed that note. You let me walk downstairs and find a bag packed by someone else's hands. You were sitting in that living room." He did not have an answer for that. I did not need him to. What happened in the days after Christmas is not a simple story. I will not pretend it was a scene from a film where everything resolves cleanly and everyone learns their lesson and goes home better. Real life is not like that. Renee and Nathan moved out in January. It took them 3 weeks to find a rental. A house in Windermere, 2 bedrooms, more than they wanted to spend, but they managed. The conversation about the house did not happen all at once. It happened in pieces, over several weeks, in the uncomfortable, halting way that real conversations between people who have hurt each other tend to happen. There were things said that I have had to work to forgive. There were things I said too, not in that kitchen on Christmas Eve, but in the weeks that followed, when I was tired and the hurt had settled in, that I am not proud of. Nathan and I have a relationship now. It is not the relationship I imagined we would have. It is careful. There are things we step around. But he calls me on Sundays sometimes, and I answer. And we talk about hockey and his job, and the small, ordinary things that are the material of a life. I do not know if Renee has forgiven me for what she perceives as my role in this. I am not sure I am the one who needs her forgiveness. The house is mine. It is quiet in the evenings, the way it was before they moved in. But it is a different kind of quiet now. Not the raw, aching quiet of the first years after Carol, but something closer to settled. I repainted the living room in March in a pale blue Carol had always wanted and we had never gotten around to. I took a beginner's woodworking class at the community center in Millwoods, and I am, by general consensus, not very good at it. Biscuit is still here. Nathan let me keep him, which was either generosity or an acknowledgement that the dog had clearly already chosen. I tell this story not because I want sympathy and not because I want to make my son look like a villain. He is not a villain. He is a man who lets something go too far for too long, the way people do when the uncomfortable conversation always seems like it can wait until tomorrow. I understand that. I have lived that. I tell it because I have spoken to other men my age, in waiting rooms, at the community center, at my friend Walter's kitchen table, and the story I have just told you is not as uncommon as you might think. Not the specific details, but the shape of it. The father who is too accommodating. The arrangement that has no clear terms. The gradual erosion of what is yours until you find yourself standing in your own kitchen on Christmas Eve wondering what happened. If I could say one thing clearly to anyone in a similar situation, anyone who has opened their home to someone they love and watched the edges of that generosity get quietly redrawn, it would be this. Kindness without clarity is not kindness. It is just delayed conflict, and the longer you wait, the heavier it gets. Carol would have sorted this out in the first 3 months. She would have sat down with Nathan and Renee, probably on a Sunday after dinner with tea in her good mugs, and she would have said, plainly and warmly and without any malice, "We are so glad you are here. Here is what this is. Here is what it is not." Does everyone understand? And everyone would have understood. I am slower to those conversations than she was. I am working on it. The house is still mine. So is the blue wall in the living room. So is the Sunday morning quiet, and the sound of snow on the window, and Biscuit with his head on my knee in the evenings. Not everything that is yours needs to be defended loudly. Sometimes you just need to know where the paperwork is.